Hey, how's it going? Today, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on The Burnout Society, which is a philosophy essay by Byung-Chul. I'll tell you why I read this book, then give a brief summary, which could be helpful if you haven't read it yourself, and then get into some analysis, which is probably what you're here for if you have read this book. I saw this book on a philosophy reading list, and for whatever reason decided to pick it up. It's fairly short, and I've never read anything by Byung-Chul, so why not? Overall, my feelings about this are a mixed bag. There are some things in here that I think are insightful and timely, but there's also a lot in here that I can't reasonably agree with, even if I take a very charitable interpretation of what he's saying. Important to note is that I did read a translation of this book, given that I don't speak German, but for the most part I think the sentiment is roughly the same. So I promise I'll get into my personal feelings more later, but first I'll try to summarize the content of the book as faithfully as possible, and I'll try to leave the personal bias aside until the second half of the video. Dr. Han's main thesis is that modern society suffers from an epidemic of burnout, and at the root of this burnout is what he calls excess positivity. When he says excess positivity, he isn't referring to good vibes and positive emotions, but what I'll call here the lack of the other. Throughout human history, one of our driving forces has been the opposition towards things we are not. Other groups of people, other ideas, and these create distinctions which help us more clearly realize our identities. This excess positivity can also refer to our greater potential for achievement. In his view, the conditions of modern society allow for the belief that, theoretically, anyone can be anything they want, and that this lack of limitations creates an internal pressure to succeed by society's standards. 21st century society, to Han, is the achievement society, and our self-worth becomes dictated by what we have, what we've achieved, and our status in the rat race. Han goes on to blame our mental crises of ADHD, depression, and borderline personality disorder, among other neurological illnesses, on burnout that results from our achievements in real life not measuring up to our images of what we should be. And rather than this projected self-image coming in from the outside, as in the case of a tyrannical boss or overbearing parents, Han contends that we're the ones who create that image, and that we work harder and harder to live up to what we should be. Modern capitalism drives us to force ourselves to be better, to be more efficient and more productive than is realistically possible. This is done to some extent in service of narcissism and the ego, so that we can be gratified by our position in achievement society, but our failure to do so produces psychological harm, which is compounded by our inability to say no to our impulses. The drive to police ourselves into being more extends beyond our actions and into our thoughts. Not only do we critique what we do, we constantly critique our mind. Achievement society has invaded our inner lives to a great extent. As a solution to this, Han stresses that two emotional states which we generally avoid, tiredness and boredom, are necessary to avoid burnout. In these states, we can enter into a deeper and more contemplative mode of being, wherein our true self emerges. In direct contrast to achievement society, which prioritizes a hyperactive and restless pursuit of our goals, boredom offers us an avenue to build up our ability for attention, and tiredness will lead to a rejuvenation of self. Okay, that's about all the summary I'm going to give. If you want more, go read the book. And now you get to hear me yap about my personal thoughts. There's a massive omission here, and that's the role of consumption in modern day capitalist society. I think there should be an argument made that the excess positivity he's referring to also includes the constant stream of inputs we're subjected to via entertainment media, whether that's online or in television or through magazines even, but I think it's pretty clear that his primary focus in this book is the pressure to work harder. He talks about the vita activa, or active life here, as opposed to the vita contemplativa, or contemplative life. And if you really wanted to, I suppose you could throw consumption into that active category, but I am not quite that charitable. Consumption to me is passive, and not meaningfully addressing its role in our lives is a mistake. How that contributes to burnout, how entertainment media plays into our self-evaluation, and whether that meaningfully contributes to rest and rejuvenation need to be discussed, because the majority of the 21st century workers' time off is spent consuming media. Even though this book was written in 2011, well before things on this front developed into what they are today, I still think Han has a responsibility to discuss this more. In addition, I think this book is clearly written from the perspective of an ivory tower philosophy professor. Quotations like, "Struggle no longer occurs between groups, ideologies, or classes, but between individuals," and "Depression is not a consequence of repression that stems from instances of domination," are just flat out wrong in my eyes. I'm going to stay on that second quote for a little bit because he attempts to clarify this by defining a second term, melancholy, which comes from an abundance of repression or lack of possibilities, and then clarifies that this is not what he's referring to. My beef with this point is that our material conditions enforce repression and domination on us. I too would like to go study philosophy for a living, but unfortunately I gotta be up for work at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I will never be able to afford to go to college again. And just the fact that I got to go at all is an incredible stroke of luck. If Han is talking about the widespread epidemic of depression that he claims he is, I would argue that this is more of a result of lack of possibility than an excess of it. He speaks endlessly about our possibilities in modern society, but nearly everyone living in these advanced societies knows that this is a lie. Go tell the single mother working 3 jobs that A, anything is possible in modern society, and B, her depression stems from an excess of positivity, and see how it goes. People's material conditions are more of an influence on their behavior and their burnout than this deep philosophical premise of society-inflicted neuroses. I'm not saying that the illusion of possibility doesn't cause psychic damage, but I think he could do a lot more to clarify that this is an illusion and not reality. I said at the beginning that my feelings about this book are somewhat of a mixed bag, and so far I've addressed my negative thoughts, but I still think there's a lot of good stuff in this book. His point about self-monitoring and self-expectation invading our psychological landscape is really poignant. I agree with his ideas about boredom. Because, I find whenever I go on a long hike with no phone, or I take a lengthy shower and I start to get bored, I'm infused with this creative energy that I didn't really have before that. And that's a direct result of boredom. While he does suffer a little bit from reference fatigue, interfacing with previous thinkers on a superficial level, I think that addressing our shift to an achievement-based society and how that creates burnout is somewhat timely, but that his analysis doesn't extend far enough. Okay, wrap up. Overall, meh. If you've got a spare couple of hours, maybe this is worth a read for you, and if you're interested in philosophy, this is a pretty short one, but overall, I probably wouldn't read this again. So that's all for this review. Let me know what I should read next. See ya.